New York City, the Hartwell Foundation's annual gala. 9 p.m., 300 people in that ballroom. And Nora Hartwell, 6 months pregnant, was the only one who recognized the necklace. Her grandmother's necklace, on her husband's Mistress. She didn't cry, didn't make a scene. She walked straight to the stage, took the microphone, and said, "My name is Nora Eleanor Whitfield Hartwell. And that necklace, it's in our trust inventory."
Item 47. Her husband's hands went flat on the table.
The woman wearing it stopped breathing. This is the story of a woman who stayed quiet to protect her marriage until the night she decided the marriage wasn't worth the silence. That necklace belongs to this foundation, and so it turns out, does everything else you thought was his. Nora had rehearsed staying calm. She'd been doing it for years, actually staying calm while Marcus took calls at dinner, staying calm when he came home smelling like someone else's perfume and called it a client meeting, staying calm when her OB said the baby's heartbeat was strong and Marcus wasn't in the room to hear it. Staying calm was what Nora did. It was practically a skill at this point. But she hadn't rehearsed for the necklace. She saw it the moment she walked through the doors of the Grand Meridian Hotel. Hard to miss, honestly. The ballroom was dressed up the way only serious old money knows how to dress a room. White florals from floor to ceiling, candles that probably cost more per hour than most people's rent, a string quartet tucked into the corner playing something that no one was actually listening to. 300 guests in black tie. The kind of event that showed up in the style section of the Times the next morning with a caption about generosity and legacy and the future of philanthropy. Nora had been to this gala 11 times. She knew every caterer, every exit, every name on the seating chart. She'd personally approved the floral arrangements in February. She walked in and the first thing she saw was her grandmother's necklace on another woman's throat. It was a thin gold chain with a single oval sapphire pendant, deep blue, surrounded by seed pearls. Her grandmother Eleanor had worn it in every photograph taken after 1962. It had sat in the Whitfield estate inventory for decades before Nora inherited it. She'd worn it exactly twice, once to her own wedding and once to this gala, 4 years ago, the year she and Marcus got married. She remembered taking it off that night and putting it in the velvet pouch in her jewelry drawer. 2 years ago, Marcus told her it was gone, said the housekeeper must have moved it, that he'd looked everywhere, that he was sorry. He'd offered to replace it with something from Tiffany's. Nora had said no. You can't replace a thing like that. She stood in the entrance of the Grand Meridian Ballroom and watched Camille Royce laugh at something across the room, one hand resting on Marcus's arm, the sapphire catching the light every time she moved her head. Nora did not move for about 4 seconds. Then she smoothed the front of her dress deep navy, empire waist, because at 6 months pregnant your options are limited and you might as well own it, and she walked in. She hadn't known about Camille for long, 3 weeks, maybe 4. A name she'd found on a credit card statement for a restaurant she'd never been to. A restaurant that turned out to be the kind of place you take someone you're trying to impress. She'd done what any reasonable person with access to Google and a very bad feeling does. She'd confirmed it quietly. She hadn't confronted Marcus yet. She'd been waiting, and she hadn't been entirely sure what she was waiting for. Now she knew. She made her way to her table 1, nearest the stage, which was where the chair of the Whitfield Trust always sat, a detail that had never seemed important enough to explain to her husband. She set her clutch down, accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server, and took a slow breath. Across the room, Marcus hadn't seen her come in. He was standing near the bar with Camille and 2 other men Nora vaguely recognized from his firm. He was smiling. He looked relaxed in the way people look when they think they're safe. Nora watched him for a moment. Then she took out her phone and sent a text to Daniel Choi, the foundation's general counsel. "I'm here. Keep the program on schedule. Don't change anything." Daniel's reply came back in under 30 seconds. "Understood, Chair Whitfield. Everything's in place." She put her phone away. Marcus spotted her about 10 minutes later. She watched him do the math in real time, the slight stiffening of his shoulders, the way his eyes moved from her to Camille and back again, the recovery smile he put on as he excused himself and crossed the room. "You made it," he said. He kissed her cheek. He smelled like his whiskey and someone else's cologne. "I thought you weren't feeling well." "I felt better." She looked at him evenly. "You look surprised." "I'm not surprised. I'm glad." He touched her elbow. "How are you feeling?" "You should sit down." "I'm standing. I'm fine." He glanced back toward the bar. Camille had turned away and was talking to one of the other men, the sapphire pendant moving every time she gestured. Marcus looked back at Nora. Nothing in his face admitted anything. "Who's the woman in the green dress?" Nora asked. "One of the firm's junior partners," Marcus said. "Camille Royce. She handles some of our nonprofit compliance work. She's been involved with the gala planning." A small pause. "Good at her job." Nora nodded slowly. "She's wearing a beautiful necklace." Something passed through Marcus's eyes. "Quick. Gone, is she?" "I hadn't noticed." It's very distinctive, Nora said. Sapphire pendant, seed pearls, oval setting. She let that sit for a second. Looks almost exactly like the one that went missing from my jewelry drawer. Marcus held her gaze. His jaw was relaxed. His voice was steady. Years of boardrooms had taught him how to look like he wasn't feeling anything. A lot of jewelry looks alike, Nora. You're right, she said pleasantly. It does. She touched his arm once, briefly. Go enjoy the cocktail hour. I need to check in with the team. She left him standing there and went to find Daniel. Daniel Choi was 34 years old, had a law degree from Columbia, and had worked for the Whitfield Trust for 6 years. He was the kind of lawyer who read documents the way other people read novels carefully, with real attention, looking for the thing that was trying to hide. He was also one of maybe 8 people alive who knew exactly who Nora Whitfield Hartwell was outside of her marriage. She found him near the back corridor, talking quietly to one of the event coordinators. He dismissed the coordinator when he saw Nora's face. Tell me the program is locked, she said, completely. He handed her a small leather folder, the evening's official agenda, the one the Foundation's board had signed off on in January. Trustee remarks are at 9:15, right before the award presentation. Your name is on the script as the presenting speaker. Has been since October. Marcus knows I sometimes introduce the awards. She flipped through the folder without really reading it. He thinks it's ceremonial, most people do. Daniel kept his voice neutral. Are we proceeding as discussed last week? Yes. She handed the folder back. Pull the trust inventory documentation, the full asset schedule from the 2019 amendment. I want it printed and notarized before 9 o'clock. Daniel nodded once. Already done. I anticipated you might want it tonight. He paused. The necklace? She's wearing it. Nora said it the way you say something you've already accepted, flat, factual, with no room for drama. It's in the asset schedule. Item 47. Described as a 1962 Cartier sapphire pendant on 18-karat gold chain, Eleanor Whitfield bequest. Daniel was quiet for a moment. How do you want to play the cocktail hour? Normally, she said. I want everything to look completely normal until 9:15. She smoothed the front of her dress again. Make sure the notary is here by 8:30. She's already in the back office. He looked at Nora carefully. Are you all right? I'm 6 months pregnant and my grandmother's necklace is on my husband's mistress, Nora said. But I'm functional. That's enough for tonight. The cocktail hour moved the way these things do, slowly, then all at once. Nora worked the room because she'd been working rooms like this her whole life, long before she met Marcus Hartwell. She'd grown up going to her father's charity events, learning how to ask people about themselves and actually listen, learning that the person worth talking to at a fundraiser is almost never the one standing in the center of the room. She shook hands. She laughed at the right moments. She asked Congressman Aldridge about his daughter's new job and genuinely remembered the answer from last year's conversation. She was good at this. She'd just never done it in front of Marcus. Around 8 o'clock, she felt the first wave of dizziness, low blood sugar. Probably, she'd been too nervous to eat much before coming. She found a chair near the wall and sat for a moment, pressing her fingers against her temple. Mrs. Hartwell. The voice came from her left. She looked up. Dr. Patricia Webb, her OB she'd forgotten. Patricia was on the Foundation's board. Are you all right? You look a little pale. I'm fine. Just need a minute. Patricia crouched beside her, completely unbothered by her own floor-length gown. She took Nora's wrist and checked her pulse the automatic way doctors do when they can't stop being doctors even at Galas. Have you eaten? Not enough, Ms. Whitfield. Patricia's voice shifted slightly quieter, more clinical. Your pressure's been running a little high this trimester. I don't want you overdoing it tonight. Nora heard footsteps stop behind her. She didn't turn around. Ms. Whitfield? Marcus's voice. He'd been walking by, apparently. Patricia, she's Mrs. Hartwell. Patricia looked up. She had the calm face of someone who had delivered 10,000 babies and was not rattled by much. The patient's name on file is Whitfield, she said simply. I go by whatever's in the chart. She turned back to Nora. I'll grab you something from the appetizer station. Stay seated for 10 minutes. She stood and left. Marcus lowered himself into the chair beside Nora. What was that about? Old records. Nora kept her eyes forward. You know how medical offices are. They never update anything. She called you Miss Whitfield. She called me what's in her system. He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him looking at her profile. Nora, I'm fine, Marcus. She turned to look at him. His face was doing something complicated, something that might have been concern or might have been suspicion. She couldn't tell anymore. She used to be able to read him. Go back to your clients. I just need 10 minutes. He stayed another few seconds. Then he left. Patricia brought her a plate of food and sat with her for a while, talking about nothing important, her eldest son's college applications, a conference she'd attended in Chicago last month. Nora ate and felt the dizziness settle. Across the room, she could see Marcus making his way back to Camille. She watched Camille touch his forearm when he said something, a small, proprietary touch, the kind you don't make with a colleague. The necklace caught the light. A woman nearby was taking a photo laughing, posing with friends in front of the historical display wall near the entrance. The display wall was something the Foundation's communications team had put together 5 years ago, a timeline of the Hartwell Philanthropic Group's history, photographs going back to the founding in 1987. Nora had consulted on the captions herself. Camille had drifted over to that side of the room. She was standing near the display wall now, talking, gesturing, the sapphire moving with her. Behind her, about 3 feet up, was a framed photograph. Eleanor Whitfield at the inaugural Gala, 1987, wearing the necklace. The caption read, Whitfield Founding Bequest presented in honor of the Trust's establishment. Nora looked at that photograph for a long time. She thought about her grandmother, who had built something real and then been careful about who she left it to, who had told Nora, when Nora was 19, power isn't something you display, sweetheart. It's something you use once, correctly, when the moment comes. She thought about 4 years of a marriage she'd believed in. She thought about the baby, who had no idea what kind of night this was going to be. Then she thought about 9:15 and the microphone and the notarized trust document waiting in the back office. She set her empty plate aside, stood up and straightened her dress. She had exactly 1 hour and 12 minutes. She smiled at Patricia. Thank you, she said. I feel much better. And she meant it. The bidding paddles were cream-colored this year. Little detail, but Nora had approved them: the color, the weight, the font on the number. She'd approved the centerpieces too, and the menu, and the seating arrangement that put the Foundation's largest donors closest to the stage. She'd done it all through Daniel, the way she always did, and none of it had ever come up at dinner with Marcus. That was the thing about being invisible. You could arrange a great deal. The charity auction was the centerpiece of the evening, always had been. Going back to the Foundation's second year, when Eleanor Whitfield decided a silent auction wasn't dramatic enough and switched to a live format with a real auctioneer. The items on offer tonight were the kind of things that required a certain kind of money to even pretend to want: a week at a private villa in Tuscany, courtside seats for the Knicks playoffs, a commission with a sculptor whose work hung in 3 major museums. The auctioneer was a man named Gerald Fitch, who did this for 6 foundations a year and had a voice like a radio announcer from 1955. He was very good at his job. Nora took her seat at table 1. The lights over the ballroom dimmed slightly to signal the transition. 300 guests began finding their way to their chairs. Marcus sat down beside her. He'd brought Camille to the table, not to the same table that would have been too obvious even for him. Camille was at table 3, 2 rows back, with a group of people from the firm. But Marcus had walked her there himself personally and said something that made her smile before he came back to his wife. Nora watched the whole thing from across the room with the expression she used at board meetings when someone said something she already knew was wrong. Gerald's in good form tonight, Marcus said, settling into his chair. He picked up his paddle number 12, table 1, and turned it over in his hands out of habit. He'd bid at this auction for 4 years running. Never won anything, but he enjoyed the performance of it. He usually is, Nora said. The first few items moved quickly. The villa went for $42,000 to a hedge fund manager named Barrett, who went to these things specifically to win the villa. The Knicks seats climbed to $31,000 before a woman in a red dress at table 7 took them with a single clean raise. The room was warmed up, generous, slightly drunk, exactly where you wanted a charity auction crowd. Then Gerald Fitch leaned into the microphone and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, our next item is a little unusual. It comes to us not from a donor catalog, but as a spontaneous offering from one of our guests this evening. I'm told this is a personal gesture of support for the Foundation's work." He smiled the way auctioneers do when they're enjoying a surprise. "May I introduce Miss Camille Royce?" Nora went very still. Camille stood. She was composed. Nora would give her that. She had the posture of someone who had rehearsed looking unrehearsed. She touched the necklace at her throat, unclasped it with practiced ease, and held it up so the sapphire caught the stage light. "This is a piece that's meaningful to me personally," Camille said into the handheld mic Gerald offered her. Her voice carried warmth, sincerity, all the right notes. "I'd like to offer it tonight as a gift back to this foundation, which does such extraordinary work. No reserve. Whatever it brings, it all goes directly to the Hartwell Philanthropic Group." The room responded the way it was supposed to: a soft wave of appreciation, a scattering of applause, a murmur about how generous, how lovely. Gerald beamed. Several paddles lifted speculatively. Marcus was watching from table 1 with an expression Nora couldn't quite name. Satisfied, maybe, like a move had gone as planned. Nora reached for her water glass. She took one slow sip. Then she raised her hand. Not the bidding paddle, just her hand, calm and open, the way you raise it when you have a procedural point at a meeting. Gerald paused. He'd worked enough foundation events to recognize the difference between a bidder and someone who needed the floor. Mrs. Hartwell? I'm sorry to interrupt. She kept her voice pleasant. I just want to make sure we follow foundation protocol. For any item entering the auction that wasn't on the original catalog, our bylaws require provenance documentation for the record. She smiled at Gerald. It's a compliance thing. We've had the policy since 2018. It was a real policy. Daniel had drafted it after a donated piece of art turned out to have a disputed ownership history. It had never been invoked at the live auction before, but it was on the books. Gerald looked slightly uncertain. He was an auctioneer, not a lawyer. Of course, absolutely. He looked at Camille. Camille was still holding the necklace. Something had shifted in her expression just slightly, like a radio dial moved one notch. She recovered fast. That's not a problem at all, she said smoothly. Personal peace. I can provide whatever documentation is needed. Wonderful, Nora said. She turned toward Daniel, who was standing near the side wall as he always was during the auction. Daniel, would you note that for the record? We'll need the item's documented ownership history before it can be formally logged as a foundation asset. Daniels was already writing. Noted, Chair Whitfield. The room shifted. Not dramatically, most people didn't catch it. But the people who paid attention to things like titles and formalities, the lawyers and the board members and the ones who'd been coming to this gala for a decade, those people heard it. A few heads turned toward Nora. A few people looked at Camille. One woman at table 4 leaned toward her husband and said something quietly behind her hand. Marcus heard it. She saw his hand tighten around his paddle. Camille met Nora's eyes across the room for the first time that evening. It lasted about 2 seconds, that look. Then Camille smiled a specific kind of smile, the one that says, I know what you're doing and it doesn't matter, and she said, of course, happy to cooperate. She handed the necklace to Gerald and sat back down. Gerald moved on. The auction resumed. Someone bid $8,000 on the necklace. Someone countered with 10, and eventually a woman at table 9 bought it for $14,500, which was a reasonable price for a piece of jewelry at a charity auction and a catastrophically low price for a $1,962 Cartier sapphire pendant. Nora logged that in her memory. The valuation alone was going to be interesting documentation. At her elbow, Marcus leaned in. His voice was low. Was that necessary? The policy exists for a reason, she said. You embarrassed her. I applied a bylaw. She picked up her water glass again, to a donated item. At our foundation's auction, she paused. At least one of those words should be giving you pause right now, Marcus. He looked at her. What does that mean? It means enjoy the auction, she said simply. He sat back. The muscle in his jaw moved once. He didn't say anything else. The thing about Marcus was that he wasn't stupid. That had always been part of the problem. He was quick, sharp, good at reading rooms, all the things that made him effective at his job. But there were specific blind spots in him, the kind that grow in men who get used to being the smartest person at the table. He stopped looking for information he didn't think he needed. Stopped reading documents he assumed were routine. Stopped asking questions about the parts of his wife's life that never seemed to require anything from him. He knew Nora came from money. He'd known that going in. The Whitfield name wasn't common knowledge in his circles, but it wasn't a secret. Either her family had been in New England finance for 3 generations, old and quiet about it, the kind of wealth that doesn't need to perform. He'd like that about her, actually. She didn't need anything from him. She was calm and capable, and she never asked him to prove himself, which was more than he could say for most of the people in his life. What he hadn't done not once, in 4 years of marriage, was look at a trust document with her name on it. He'd signed the prenuptial agreement his firm's lawyers prepared. He'd noted she had assets of her own. He'd filed that information away under not my concern and moved on to things he found more interesting. That was the specific shape of his blindness. And Nora had known it, and she had let it stand, because she had her own reasons for keeping her distance from her own money. Her father had used his like a weapon. She hadn't wanted that inside her marriage. She thought about that now, watching the auction conclude, watching Marcus sit beside her with his polite expression and his tightened jaw. She thought about all the choices that had led here, all the silences that had felt like protection and turned out to be permissions. The woman at table 9 was examining her new necklace with genuine pleasure. She had no idea what she was holding. Nora would fix that. Later properly, through the right channels. Intermission came at 8:45. The lights lifted, the servers came back through, people stood and stretched and went looking for the bathroom or the bar. The string quartet picked up again in the corner. The room went loose and social. Nora stayed at her table. Across the room, she could see Camille moving toward Marcus, but differently now, more careful, reading him the way you read a situation that's gone slightly sideways. They spoke for a moment, heads close. Marcus glanced once toward table 1. Nora was looking directly at him when he did. He looked away first. Daniel appeared at her shoulder. He set a thin manila folder on the table beside her water glass. Notarized and witnessed, he said quietly. 2 copies. The asset schedule is tabbed at item 47. Nora didn't open the folder. Thank you. 30 minutes until your remarks, he said. I know. He hesitated. The board members who are here tonight, the ones who know your full role, I've briefed them. Quietly, a pause. They're with you. She looked at him. All of them? All 5 who are present, yes. She nodded slowly. And the notary? Back office. She'll stay through the program. Good. She set her hand flat on the manila folder. It was a small thing, a folder. Paper, ink, a stamp. It didn't look like much. I don't want this to feel like an attack, she said. When I get up there, I don't want it to be about him or about her. I want it to be about the foundation and what it's owed. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the truth isn't an attack, Chair Whitfield. It's just the truth, she almost smiled. You've been waiting to say that. Since October, honestly. This time she did smile. It was a small one, and it faded quickly, but it was real. Go make sure Gerald has the updated program. He went. She was sitting alone at table 1 when Camille Royce came to her. She'd half expected it. Camille was not the kind of person who let things sit unaddressed. That much was clear from the calculated necklace move, from the way she'd handled the provenance question. She was a lawyer. She preferred the controlled conversation to the open question. Camille sat down in the chair Marcus usually occupied. She was carrying a glass of white wine, and she set it on the table with the ease of someone who felt entitled to the space. I wanted to clear the air, Camille said. About earlier. There's nothing to clear, Nora said pleasantly. I think there might be. Camille's voice was calm and professional. No hostility in it, nothing you could point to. I understand you have a role with the foundation. An honorary one. I know Marcus mentioned. He mentioned my role? Nora asked. A small hesitation. Generally, the family connection. The family connection, Nora repeated. She looked at Camille steadily. That's an interesting way to describe it. Camille shifted slightly. I just want to make sure tonight doesn't become complicated. The necklace was a gesture in good faith. I didn't realize there was a documentation requirement. Now you do, Nora said. Silence. The string quartet was playing something Nora recognized, a Brahms intermezzo, the slow one, the one that sounded like someone trying to hold on to something they knew they were going to lose. You're not what I expected, Camille said finally. Nora considered that for a moment. What did you expect? Camille looked at her at the navy dress, the pregnancy, the absolute stillness of her. Someone easier, she said. It came out almost honest. Most people do, Nora said. She reached forward and picked up the manila folder. She didn't open it. She just set it in her lap, her hand resting on top of it. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Ms. Royce. Camille held her gaze for one more second. Then she picked up her wine glass and left. Nora looked down at the folder in her hands. Then she looked at the stage empty now, patient, waiting, 27 minutes. She folded her hands in her lap, sat very straight, and waited too. The intermission crowd thinned slowly, the way crowds do when the bar is still open and nobody's in a hurry. Servers moved through with fresh glasses. The quartet switched to something livelier. Marcus was somewhere near the east side of the room. Nora could track him without looking directly at him, the way you learn to track certain things after 4 years. She needed air. Not dramatically, not the way women in movies press the back of their hand to their forehead and go looking for a fainting couch. Just the room was warm, and the smell of 400 floral arrangements was starting to feel like a physical weight. And the baby had decided this was a good moment to practice whatever it was doing in there that felt like someone reorganizing furniture. She stood, picked up her clutch, and slipped out through the side corridor that led to the small reception lounge the hotel kept for foundation use. The lounge was quiet, 2 armchairs, a low table, a lamp with a warm bulb. Nora sat down and let her shoulders drop for the first time all evening. She stayed like that for maybe 2 minutes, just breathing. Then the door opened and Patricia Webb came through, still carrying her champagne from the cocktail hour, though it had gone flat by now. She stopped when she saw Nora. I was looking for you, Patricia said. One of the servers said you came this way. She studied Nora's face with the clinical attention she couldn't seem to turn off.
Dizzy again?
No, just tired. Patricia sat in the other chair anyway. She set her champagne glass on the table and folded her hands in her lap and looked at Nora the way she'd been looking at her since the 2nd trimester, like a document she was reading carefully for anything she might have missed.
Your blood pressure was elevated when I checked your wrist earlier,
She said. I want you to come in Monday. I'll call the office. I mean it. Nora, I know you mean it. Nora leaned her head back against the chair. I'll call Monday morning. Patricia watched her for a moment. Is it the event or is something else going on tonight? Nora looked at the ceiling. There was a small water stain in the corner of the plaster, shaped vaguely like a hand. She'd been staring at it for 30 seconds before she realized she was doing it. Something else, she said. Patricia didn't push. That was one of the things Nora had always liked about her. She knew when a question had been answered as much as it was going to be answered. The baby's moving a lot, Nora added. She's been active since dinner. She's probably responding to your stress hormones. Patricia's voice was matter-of-fact. They crossed the placental barrier. She knows something's up even if she doesn't know what. Nora put one hand flat against the side of her stomach. The baby pushed back a slow, firm pressure, like a reminder. I'm here. Whatever you're doing out there, I'm here. Smart kid, Nora said quietly. She's got good material to work with, Patricia said. On at least one side, Nora looked at her. Patricia met her eyes without apology. So she'd noticed things too. Doctors noticed things. Ms. Whitfield. The voice came from the doorway. Both women turned. It was one of the hotel's event staff, a young man with a tablet and an earpiece, the kind of person who spends these evenings invisible and attentive.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Mr. Hartwell asked me to check on you. Tell him I'm fine, Nora said. I'll be back in 5 minutes.
The young man nodded and withdrew. Patricia looked at Nora. He sent someone to find you. He's considerate when it suits him. She said it without heat, just as a fact. Patricia picked up her flat champagne, looked at it, and set it back down. She was quiet for a moment. When you came to my office in April, she said, and you asked me to keep your maiden name on file instead of updating to Hartwell. I didn't ask you why. No, Nora said, you didn't. I respected that, I know. Another pause. Does he know? Patricia asked. About the trust? About any of it? Nora was quiet long enough that the answer was clear without being said. Patricia nodded once, slowly. Monday morning, she said again. Call first thing. First thing, Nora agreed. She was back in the ballroom by 8:58. Marcus found her before she reached the table. He came across the room toward her with his hands in his pockets, a gesture she knew meant he was working at looking casual. He'd learned it in negotiation training 15 years ago. She'd never told him she could see it. Patricia said, your blood pressure's up, he said. Patricia talks too much for a doctor. She's concerned. He walked beside her. I'm concerned. You can both relax. She kept her pace even. I checked in. I'm fine. The baby's fine. Maybe you should sit out the rest of the night. I'm introducing the awards at 9:15, she said. I do it every year. He slowed slightly. You've done the introduction twice. It's not every year. This is the third year I've done it. She said it lightly. You were in Singapore the first year. You might not remember. He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him recalculating something. I didn't know you were speaking tonight. You never ask about the program. That landed. She felt him process it, the truth of it, the mildness of her delivery, the gap between those two things. He stopped walk to, because they'd reached the table, and stopping was natural. Nora. His voice had a different quality now, lower. Something in it that might have been the beginning of an actual feeling. Is everything okay? Between us, I mean. She looked at him. His face in the candlelight was familiar, in the way that only years of looking at something makes it familiar, not beautiful, not ugly, just known. She'd loved this face. She thought she probably still did, somewhere under all the rest of it, the way you love a place you grew up in, even after you leave it. Why are you asking me that now? She said. Because you've been different tonight. He searched for the right word and didn't find it. Quiet. I'm usually quiet, not like this. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, go sit down, Marcus. She pulled out her chair and sat. The program starts in 10 minutes. He sat. He didn't touch his paddle. He was very still beside her in a way that told her the question he'd asked himself was still working through him without an answer. 2 tables back, Camille was talking to someone from the firm, animated and relaxed, performing ease the way people do when they've decided they're fine. The necklace was gone. She'd handed it to Gerald during the auction, and without it she looked slightly less polished, like a sentence missing a word. The lights in the ballroom shifted. Gerald Fitch took the stage again for a brief wrap-up on the auction totals. The evening had raised just over $400,000, which was strong for a year without a capital campaign, and the room received the number with warm applause. Gerald made a few jokes about the Knicks seats. People laughed. Nora's phone buzzed in her clutch. She slipped it out under the table.
Dan, notary confirmed. 2 board members have reviewed the trust schedule. Everything is clean. You're set.
She typed back, thank you.
She put the phone away.
Marcus, beside her, had his eyes on the stage. His phone was in his hand too, screen down on the table. As she watched, it lit up with a notification. He turned it over, read it, and his expression didn't change, but he reached out and turned it face down again with a very deliberate movement. Nora looked at the stage. She excused herself at 9:05, telling Marcus she was going to use the restroom before the program. He offered to walk with her. She said there was no need. She went instead to the corridor behind the stage, where Daniel was waiting with the manila folder and a woman in a dark blazer, who had the quiet, organized presence of someone whose job it was to certify things. Last chance to scale back, Daniel said. It wasn't a suggestion, he just wanted her to know the door was there. I'm not scaling back, Nora said. I know. He opened the folder to the tab page. Walk me through your sequence. She'd memorized it. She didn't need the folder, but she went through it with him anyway, the introduction, the board resolution language, the specific language about the necklace, the motion. Clean, procedural, airtight. She drafted it with Daniel in his office 2 weeks ago, on a Tuesday afternoon, while Marcus was in a meeting across town, sitting at a conference table with bad coffee and really good concentration. The notary, her name was Margaret. She had silver hair, and a no-nonsense handshake confirmed the stamps and the signatures. 2 witnesses, both board members, both present tonight, both fully authorized. 9:15, Daniel said. 9:15, Nora confirmed. She straightened the folder in her hands. Does Marcus know I'm speaking first, before the award? The program listed it as Foundation Remarks Whitfield Trust Representative. He's seen the program. He's never read the program. No, Daniel agreed, he hasn't. She went back to the ballroom at 9:10. The room was settling into its seats for the second half of the program. Someone had added a candle to the table 1 centerpiece. The flame moved slightly in the conditioned air. Marcus was in his chair, phone away now, hands folded on the table with the careful posture of a man who was doing the work of appearing relaxed. He looked at her when she sat. Feel better? Yes, she said. Much. She set the manila folder on the table beside her water glass. Marcus's eyes moved to it briefly. A folder wasn't unusual at these events. Board members carried things and moved away. Nora folded her hands on top of it. The room settled. Gerald Fitch returned to the stage one more time, handed over to the Foundation's executive director for a brief speech about the year's programs, and then there was a short video patient testimonials. After-school program footage, a newly funded research initiative at Columbia Presbyterian that played on the screen at the back of the stage. Nora had reviewed the cut in January. It was good. She was proud of it. Marcus watched the video. He applauded at the end. He was good at the performance of caring about things. Then the executive director said, "Before we present this year's Distinguished Service Award, we're honored to be joined for a few words by the representative of the Whitfield Family Trust. As many of you know, the Trust is the co-founding benefactor of this organization, and its chair has been a guiding force behind our work since the Foundation's inception. Please welcome." Nora was already standing. She picked up the manila folder. She pushed her chair back. Marcus heard the movement and turned, and she watched his face in the half-second before he understood what was happening. The half-second while he was still assuming this was a formality, a brief handoff, something ceremonial. She stepped away from the table. Behind her, she heard him say her name. Very quietly, Nora. She kept walking. The stage was 3 steps up from the floor. She'd stood on it before twice for the awards, once for a capital campaign launch in 2022. Gerald Fitch offered her his hand on the steps, and she took it, not because she needed it, but because it was a gracious gesture, and she was not at war with Gerald Fitch. The microphone was already adjusted to her height. Daniel had done that too. She looked out at the room, 300 people, candlelight and black tie, and the particular attentiveness of an audience that has been fed and watered and is now ready to feel something. She saw table 3 Camille Royce, sitting very straight, wine glass in her hand, watching with the careful neutrality of someone who has just registered that a situation is not what they thought it was. She saw table 1, Marcus, with both hands flat on the table now, looking up at her. His face was doing the thing where he was trying to read something he hadn't expected to find. She looked at him for exactly 1 second, then she looked back at the room. "Good evening," she said. Her voice came through the speakers clear and level. "My name is Nora Eleanor Whitfield Hartwell. I'm the chair of the Whitfield Family Trust, and by the terms of the founding deed of this organization, a co-trustee of the Hartwell Philanthropic Group."
The room was very quiet. "Most of you know this foundation by my husband's family name," she continued.
That's appropriate. The Hartwells have contributed enormously to this organization's public profile. But I want to take a moment tonight to discuss what the trust is, what it owns, and what that means for a few items that have come up in the course of this evening's program. She set the manila folder on the podium. She opened it. She didn't look down. "First," she said, "I'd like to address the item donated to tonight's auction." In the silence that followed, the candles on all the tables seemed to burn a little brighter, or maybe that was just the way the room had gone absolutely, completely still. Table 3. Camille Royce set her wine glass down. Table 1. Marcus Hartwell's hands were still flat on the table. He hadn't moved. His face had gone the careful, closed-off way it went when he understood, finally, that something was happening that he could not stop and had not prepared for. Nora reached into the folder and drew out the first notarized page. "Item 47, she said calmly, "in the Whitfield Trust Asset Schedule, amended 2019, a 1962 Cartier sapphire pendant on 18-karat gold chain, Eleanor Whitfield bequest, estimated fair market value $68,000, listed as a permanent foundation asset." She looked up at the room. That item was worn tonight by a guest of this event. It was subsequently offered for sale at our auction for a reserve price of $0. Not a sound, not a single whisper. "I want to be clear," Nora said. "This is not an accusation directed at any individual. This is a foundation matter. The asset belongs to this trust. It has always belonged to this trust, and the trust's position on the matter will be handled through the appropriate legal channels beginning tomorrow morning. She closed the folder. What I'd like to address next is a board resolution, which I'll be presenting for a vote at the conclusion of tonight's program. The resolution concerns board membership eligibility under our ethics code. She looked at the room one more time. 300 people, absolutely silent, looking back at her. Then she looked at table 1. Marcus was looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Not with anger, not yet. With something that was almost like recognition. Like a man who has just realized he has been living in a house for 4 years and never once looked at what was holding the walls up. Nora held his gaze for one steady second. Then she looked back at her notes and kept going. The board resolution was 1 page. Daniel had kept it that way deliberately, 1 page, plain language, no legal architecture that required a translator. Nora had read it so many times in the past 2 weeks that she could have recited it from the stage without looking down, but she looked down anyway. It felt important to read it properly, to give each word the weight it had earned. The resolution had 3 parts. The first part cited the Foundation's Ethics Code, Section 7, Paragraph C, which required any board member under active investigation for a breach of fiduciary duty or personal conduct violation to step back from voting privileges pending the outcome of that investigation. The second part noted that a formal ethics inquiry had been opened that afternoon, opened quietly, through the board's internal process, with the signatures of 3 sitting trustees regarding the handling of a trust asset that had left foundation inventory without documentation. The third part called for a vote. She read all 3 parts aloud. The room listened the way rooms listen when they understand that something real is happening. Not the polished, performative attention of an awards ceremony, something rawer. 300 people who had come here tonight for a charity gala and were now watching something they hadn't been invited to watch, or maybe in some part of themselves they wouldn't admit to, had always been hoping to see. The motion, Nora said, requires a simple majority of the trustees present tonight. There are 5. She looked toward the back of the room where Daniel was standing. He raised his hand. The 4 board members he'd briefed were seated at different tables, and one by one, over the next 5 seconds, they raised their hands too. 5 hands, 5 votes. Motion carries, Nora said. She didn't look at table 1. She didn't need to. She could feel Marcus in her peripheral vision, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, not the storm itself, just the signal that it's coming. She closed the folder. She set her hand flat on it, the way she'd done at table 1 an hour ago, and for a moment she just stood there at the podium. The stage lights were warm on her face. The ballroom was very still. "Thank you," she said into the microphone. "I'll turn the program back to Gerald for the award presentation." She stepped back. Gerald Fitch came forward with the energy of a man who had emceed some extraordinary events in his career and was going to get through this one with professionalism intact, God willing. He took the microphone. He cleared his throat. He said something about the Distinguished Service Award. The room began to breathe again carefully, collectively, like people who'd been holding it and weren't entirely sure it was safe to stop. Nora walked back to the steps at the edge of the stage. She took them one at a time. She did not rush. She didn't go back to table 1. She went to the side corridor, instead the same one she'd slipped into during intermission, and she stood there in the quiet with the folder against her chest and let herself feel the shaking in her hands. It had been there since she stepped up to the podium. She'd kept it out of her voice, out of her posture, out of her face. But it was there, and now that she was alone with it, she let it move through her without fighting it. The baby shifted. That same slow pressure against her ribs. "I'm here." "I know," Nora said quietly. "We're okay." She wasn't entirely sure that was true yet, but she said it anyway, because the baby didn't need to carry what she was carrying, and saying it out loud made it feel slightly more possible. The door at the end of the corridor opened. She knew the footsteps before she turned around. Marcus walked toward her the way he moved when he was keeping himself in check, measured, deliberate, each step considered. He'd looked like that in the hospital once, when his father was sick, when he was doing the work of holding himself together in a public place. She'd loved that about him then, the restraint that meant something was going on underneath. He stopped about 6 feet away from her. He looked at the folder. Then he looked at her face. "How long?" he said. Just that. 2 words. "How long what?" she said, because there were several different questions inside those 2 words, and she wasn't going to answer all of them at once. "How long have you been the chair?" "Since my grandmother died," she said. 11 years. He absorbed that. She watched do it, watched the number move through him and reorganize something. "Before we met, 3 years before we met." He was quiet. The distant sound of applause came through the wall from the ballroom, the award, presumably. Someone was accepting something. Life was continuing out there, normally without them. "The Foundation," Marcus said. "The Hartwell Philanthropic Group." "The founding deed has both names," Nora said. "Hartwell and Whitfield." Your grandfather contributed the operating capital and the public profile. My grandmother contributed the trust assets and the governing structure. Her name is on the deed in smaller letters. A pause. Nobody ever reads the deed. I didn't read the deed. No. He looked at her for a long time. Something was working through his face that she couldn't entirely read anger. She expected, but it wasn't only anger. There was something under it that looked almost like grief. Why didn't you tell me? It was a fair question. She'd thought about it a great deal. Because my father used money to own people, she said. Everyone around him, my mother, his partners, his friends. He used it to make sure nobody could leave. Nobody could say no. I didn't want to bring that into us. She held his gaze. I thought, if you didn't know, we could just be two people. We could have just been two people, he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the last word in a way she hadn't heard from him in a long time. Without all of he stopped. He looked at the wall. You had an ethics inquiry opened against me. Tonight. At our foundation's event. The inquiry was open this afternoon, she said. Before the event, Nora, you gave her my grandmother's necklace, Marcus. Her voice was still level. She was working hard to keep it that way, a piece that belongs to the trust. That's not a personal matter. That's a fiduciary issue. You're pregnant, he said, like that was relevant, like that changed the coordinates of everything. I've been pregnant for 6 months, she said. You've been seeing her for longer than that. He didn't deny it. She'd half expected him to a reflex, a delay tactic, something. But he didn't. He just stood there 6 feet away from her in a hotel corridor and didn't deny it. That somehow was the hardest part of the night so far. She heard the door open again. Daniel's head appeared around the edge of it. He'd been watching for her, she knew. She gave him a small nod. He looked at Marcus, then back at Nora, then withdrew. The Foundation's legal team will be in touch this week, she said, about the board resolution and the asset matter. I'd suggest you have your own counsel review the ethics code before that conversation. She picked up her clutch, which she'd set on the floor beside her while she was talking. That's the formal part of what I need to say to you tonight. And the informal part? His voice was quiet, not hostile, just empty in a way that was new. I don't have one yet, she said honestly. I'll need some time. He looked at her, at the dress, the folder, her face. The whole of her, the way people look when they're trying to memorize something they're afraid of losing. I didn't think you had it in you, he said. Not, he caught himself. I don't mean that the way it sounds. I know exactly how you mean it, she said. That's been the problem. She moved toward the door. He didn't stop her. She'd half expected him to do that too, reach for her arm, say something that was supposed to change the shape of the evening. He didn't. He stood with his hands at his sides and watched her go. And that was either respect or defeat or both, and she didn't have the energy to figure out which. The ballroom was back to itself by the time she re-entered. The award had been presented, she'd missed it, which she regretted, because the recipient was a woman who'd run the Foundation's literacy program for 12 years and deserved a full room for her moment. The applause was still going when Nora slipped back to table 1. Several people at nearby tables glanced at her. Some looked away quickly. Some didn't. She sat down. She set the folder beside her. She poured herself a glass of water from the carafe and drank half of it. Across the room, table 3 was in a different configuration than before. 2 of the firm's people had their heads together, talking quietly with the particular body language of people doing damage assessment. Camille Royce was not at the table. Nora scanned the room. She found her near the entrance, standing close to the coat-check corridor, phone in hand, typing with the focused urgency of someone who has just understood that the evening has moved in a direction they cannot reverse and is working to get ahead of it. Her posture was still controlled. Her face was still composed, but she was standing 2 feet from the nearest exit, which told you everything about the calculation she was running. Daniel appeared at Nora's shoulder. The notary is filing the documentation tonight, he said. We'll have certified copies by tomorrow morning. Good. Nora watched Camille across the room. She's going to lawyer up. Of course she is. She's already a lawyer. Daniel's voice was dry. For what it's worth, the asset recovery process doesn't require her cooperation. The necklace went through the auction under the Foundation's auspices tonight. We have the chain of custody. Nora nodded slowly. The woman at table 9, I've already spoken with her. Lovely woman, very understanding. She's agreed to return the piece to the Foundation pending the legal process. She was more interested in the story than the necklace, honestly. Nora almost smiled. What did you tell her? The truth, Daniel said. That it was a founding family heirloom that had been misplaced. She seemed satisfied with that, a pause. She also asked if you'd be willing to have coffee with her sometime. She's a fan, apparently. This time Nora did smile. Brief and real, tell her I'll call. Daniel nodded and moved away. The program concluded at 9:45, closing remarks from the executive director. A final thank you from Gerald. The gradual brightening of the ballroom lights that signaled to 300 people that the formal part of the evening was over. The room came alive again with the noise of people standing, gathering coats and programs, reaching for their phones. The particular social turbulence of a party ending. Nora stayed at her table. She wasn't ready to run the gauntlet of the room, the questions, the careful congratulations, the politely burning curiosity of people who had just watched something they would be talking about at dinner for months. She needed 5 more minutes of stillness before she could be social again. She looked at the stage. Gerald and the executive director were having a quiet conversation at the edge of it. The screen at the back dockyard now, the evening's presentation over. The podium was empty. She thought about her grandmother, Eleanor Whitfield, who had built something real and been careful about who she left it to, who had sat Nora down at 19 and told her that power wasn't something you displayed, who had worn this foundation the way she wore that necklace, not to be seen, but because it was hers, and it meant something, and it was worth protecting. Tonight, Nora had protected it. The cost of that was still coming. She knew that. The legal process would be slow and grinding. The press would find the story events like this one had too many witnesses with smartphones for it to stay quiet. Her private life, the one she'd kept so carefully separate from her name and her trust, was effectively over after tonight. The anonymity she'd bought with her silence was spent. She pressed her hand against the side of her stomach. The baby was quiet now, settled finally after the long active evening, just a warmth, a presence. "We did okay," Nora said softly. She meant it for both of them. She reached for the manila folder one last time, opened it to the last page, the board resolution, signed and notarized, Marcus Hartwell's name in the relevant clause, and looked at it for a moment. Not with satisfaction exactly, not with grief either. With the particular feeling of someone who has done a necessary thing and is now sitting with the weight of what necessary costs. The door at the far end of the ballroom opened. Camille Royce walked through it and was gone. Nora watched the door close. She closed the folder. One consequence handled. Several still open: Marcus, the press, the legal process, the foundation's board meeting she'd need to call in the next 10 days. The conversation she wasn't ready to have yet about what came next for the marriage, for the baby, for the version of her life she was going to have to build differently now that she'd stopped being invisible. All of that was tomorrow, and the day after, and the long stretch of days that followed. Tonight she had done what she came here to do. She picked up her clutch. She set her hand on the folder one last time. Then she stood up carefully, steadily, 6 months pregnant, at the end of a very long evening, and she walked toward the exit with her head up and the folder tucked under her arm. And she didn't look back at table 1, and she didn't look for Marcus in the crowd. She walked out of the Grand Meridian the same way she'd walked in, like someone who knew exactly where she was going. She just hadn't figured out yet what that place looked like. That part, she thought, stepping out into the cool Manhattan night, the city loud and indifferent around her, that part she'd have to build from scratch. She flagged a cab, she got in, she gave the driver her address in Brooklyn Heights. The city moved past the windows. She held the folder in her lap with both hands, and she let herself be tired finally. All the way tired, the kind that settles into your bones after you've held yourself together for longer than should be possible. The baby shifted once, soft, slow. Nora leaned her head against the window. "I know," she said quietly. "Me too." She almost made it out clean. The cab was 2 minutes away. Daniel had confirmed it by text. And Nora was moving through the hotel's side corridor with her folder and her coat, and the specific forward momentum of a woman who has spent everything she had and just needs to get to the door. The corridor smelled like carpet cleaner and leftover catering. The noise of the ballroom was muffled behind 2 sets of doors. Her heels were quiet on the floor. She was almost there. Then a door opened ahead of her, and Camille Royce stepped through it. They stopped. 6 feet apart, same as Marcus earlier, same corridor, different weight to the air. Camille had her coat on. Her clutch was in her hand and her phone was in the other, and she looked like someone who had just made 3 calls in rapid succession and was preparing to make a 4th. Her composure was still there, remarkable, really, how intact it was, but something underneath it had shifted. The confidence from the cocktail hour was gone. What remained was something harder, more focused. "I've spoken with my firm," Camille said. No preamble, no pretense of pleasantry. "What you did tonight constitutes defamation. You implied, in front of 300 witnesses, that I knowingly handled stolen property." "I said a foundation asset had left inventory without documentation," Nora said. "I didn't name you. You described the necklace from the stage. You described where it had been. I described an item in the trust schedule." Nora kept her voice even. "The documentation is accurate. Everything I said tonight is in a notarized legal record. If you'd like to verify that, Daniel Choi is still in the ballroom, and he'll be happy to provide copies." Camille's jaw tightened slightly. "You're going to hide behind procedure. I'm going to stand on procedure," Nora said. "There's a difference. This isn't over." Camille's voice had an edge, now controlled but present. "Marcus and I, not my primary concern tonight," Nora said. Simply, without cruelty. What happens between you and Marcus is between you and Marcus. What happens to a 1,962 Cartier sapphire pendant that belongs to a charitable trust is a legal matter. Those are two different conversations. Camille looked at her. Something moved through her expression, several things actually, in quick succession. Anger, then something calculating, then something that was almost a kind of unwilling assessment. She was a lawyer. She knew when an argument was lost. You've been planning this for a while, she said. 2 weeks, Nora said. Not the foundation part. Camille looked at her steadily. All of it. The waiting. She stopped. You knew about us and you waited. I needed the right moment, Nora said. And I needed it to be about something real. Something that couldn't be reframed as a jealous wife making a scene. She looked at Camille directly. You gave me the necklace. I didn't engineer that part. That was yours. Silence. The corridor hummed with the hotel's ventilation. Somewhere behind them, a door opened and closed. Camille looked down at her phone, then back up. The firm is going to want a statement, she said. About tonight. About my role in. She stopped again, pressed her lips together. The partnership review. Nora could see her thinking about it. The calculation she'd made at the beginning of this whole thing, Marcus's name, the Hartwell connections, the doors that would open, how it looked now. That's between you and your firm, Nora said. I genuinely mean that. I have no interest in your career, Ms. Royce. I have interest in a trust asset and a board resolution. Those are documented and filed, and they'll proceed through the appropriate process. She shifted the folder under her arm. I don't need anything else from you tonight. Camille held her gaze for one long moment. Not yielding, exactly more like acknowledging. The recognition of someone who had played a move and run into something she hadn't mapped. You're not what I told myself you were, Camille said finally. No, Nora said. I'm not. She stepped around her. She kept walking. Behind her she heard nothing, no footsteps following, no parting shot. Just the sound of another door opening and then closing, and then the corridor was quiet. The cab was waiting. 3 days later, the conference room on the 14th floor of the Foundation's Midtown office had 12 leather chairs and a view of Bryant Park and a photograph of Eleanor Whitfield on the east wall that Nora had always found faintly supervisory. Her grandmother looked out of that photograph with the expression of someone who expected things to be done correctly and was patient enough to wait. Today the room had 7 people in it, 5 board members, Daniel, and a litigation attorney named Rose Chambers who had been doing trust and estate work for 20 years and had the reassuring quality of someone who found complexity interesting rather than alarming. Marcus was not in the room. His counsel was a man named Petrov, sharp and careful, who had sent a 14-page letter the previous morning outlining Marcus's position. The letter made several arguments. The most substantive was that the trust document's asset schedule had never been formally disclosed to Marcus as a marital asset, and that the ethics inquiry therefore constituted a procedural overreach. Roz had read the letter twice. She'd set it on the conference table and said quietly, "That's creative." It was not a compliment. The meeting had been going for 40 minutes. Nora sat at the head of the table, which was where the trust chair sat at Foundation board meetings, a fact she had never before exercised in front of Marcus's counsel. She listened more than she spoke. She let Rose and Daniel carry the procedural weight, which was what you paid them for, which was what you understood when you stopped trying to handle everything alone. Petrov made his arguments. He was good. She could see why Marcus had chosen him. He moved through the points cleanly, without aggression, the way a skilled lawyer argues when he knows the case is upstream and needs to rely on craft rather than momentum. Ross listened. Then she opened a folder of her own. The ethics inquiry, Ross said, was initiated by 3 trustees acting within their authority under Section 4 of the Foundation's governance charter. The procedure is valid. She turned a page. The asset schedule disclosing the necklace as trust property has been on file with the Foundation since 2019, when the trust was amended. It was available to any board member at any time. Mr. Hartwell has been a board member since 2021. Another page, he had access. Access is disclosure in a governance context. Petrov shifted slightly.
My client was not made aware.
Your client had access, Rose said again pleasantly. Those are different things. We're happy to discuss what he chose to do with that access. Silence. The Bryant Park trees were bright in the October light outside the window. A jogger went past 14 floors below, indifferent to all of it. Petrov tried 2 more angles. Roz met both of them with the same quality of attention, thorough, unhurried, slightly interested. She didn't win through aggression. She won through precision, which was a more complete kind of winning. At the end of the second angle, Petrov was quiet for a moment. He gathered his papers into a neat stack. He looked at Nora directly for the first time in the meeting.
My client would like a conversation, he said. Not through counsel.
Directly. Nora looked at him steadily. About what specifically? About the board resolution. Its scope and duration. A pause. and about matters outside the foundation context. The board resolution will proceed through the standard review period, Nora said. That's 60 days under the ethics code. At the end of 60 days, the board votes on whether to extend or lift it. That process doesn't require a direct conversation. She paused. As for matters outside the foundation, tell your client he knows where I live. Petrov nodded once. He closed his briefcase. The meeting ended 12 minutes later. People filed out. Daniel stayed as he always did, waiting until the room was clear. That was the part he wasn't expecting, Daniel said, when the last board member had gone. The access argument. Marcus never reads documents he thinks are someone else's job, Nora said. She was looking at the photograph of Eleanor on the wall. Her grandmother's patient, expectant face. He assumed the foundation's governance was administrative, something the lawyers handled. A lot of people assume that. A lot of people aren't on the board. Daniel gathered his folders. Petrov will be back. He'll reframe it. Let him. She stood up. Roz likes reframes. It gives her something to do. She picked up her own folder, lighter now. Fewer documents. The weight of the first night already filed and processed and moving through the machinery of law. Schedule the 60-day review for the board and send me the draft of the asset recovery letter for the auction records. Already in your inbox, she almost smiled. What would I do without you? Have better weekends, he said. She laughed, a real one, brief and surprised. It felt good. She hadn't laughed in 4 days. She put on her coat and went home. 6 weeks later, the apartment was on the 4th floor of a brownstone on Willow Street, 2 blocks from the promenade, and it belonged to Nora in a way that the house in Tribeca had never quite managed. She'd bought it before the marriage, kept it, paid its maintenance through a shell account, connected to the trust the way her father had taught her to manage things before she'd decided to manage things differently. She'd told Marcus it was a family property she occasionally used for work. He'd been to it exactly once, years ago, and had not asked about it since. She was sitting on the couch with her feet up when the buzzer rang. 11 in the morning, gray November sky outside, the kind of cold that had moved into the city quietly and settled in like it was staying. The baby was due in 10 weeks. She was the size she privately felt of a reasonable ottoman. She checked the intercom. Marcus. She pressed the door release without saying anything. She heard him on the stairs, his footsteps, which she still knew, would probably always know, 4 years of a particular way of moving through a house. He knocked, which he wouldn't have done 6 weeks ago, and that small thing said something about where they were now. She opened the door. He looked tired. Not dramatically. Marcus would never allow dramatic tiredness. The public version of him required a baseline of composure, but around his eyes and in the set of his shoulders, there was a tiredness that hadn't been there before. He was in a coat, she recognized, holding a paper bag from the bakery on Montague Street. She recognized that, too. He held the bag up slightly. I remembered you liked the almond croissants, he said. I didn't know if that was still... He stopped. I didn't know if it was a good time. It's fine, she said. Come in. He came in. He looked at the apartment, the warm lamp in the corner, the stack of books on the coffee table, the small onesies folded on the armchair that she'd been sorting through that morning. His eyes stayed on those for a moment. She went to the kitchen for plates. He stood in the living room and didn't sit down until she came back and gestured at the couch. He sat. She sat in the chair across from him, the armchair without the onesies, and she set the plates on the coffee table between them and opened the bakery bag. How are you feeling, he said. 10 weeks out, she said. Everything's within normal range. Blood pressure is down. She looked at him. Patricia sends thorough reports. He nodded. He stopped, started again. I've been thinking about what to say for 6 weeks. What did you come up with? He was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands. Marcus almost never looked at his hands. He was a man who made eye contact the way some people use tools deliberately as a technique. This was different. I told Petrov to withdraw the objection, he said. Nora waited. To the board resolution. He looked up. I'm not contesting it. The 60-day review, I'm not going to fight it. And at the end of it, I'm going to resign from the board voluntarily. Before the vote, she looked at him steadily. Why? Because Petrov's argument was technically sound and completely wrong, he said. I had access to the trust documents. I didn't read them. That's on me. He held her gaze. Everything that came after that is on me. She didn't say anything. She'd learned over these 6 weeks to give silence its full space, to not rush to fill it with reassurance or with anger or with anything, to just let it be what it was and see what came next. I've been trying to figure out, Marcus said, slowly, how I convinced myself you were someone smaller than you are, and I keep coming back to the same thing. He paused. I needed you to need me, and you never did. And instead of understanding what that meant about you, I made it mean something about us, something that gave me a reason to...
He stopped.
I'm not excusing it. I'm trying to understand it, because I think I need to understand it before I can do anything else correctly. Nora picked up her croissant. She held it for a moment without eating it. It wasn't smallness, she said. What I did. Keeping the trust separate. I thought I was being protective. She looked at him. I made it so you never had to reckon with who I was. And then I was surprised when you didn't know. She set the croissant down. That's mine. I'm not carrying all of it, but that part is mine. He looked at her. Something moved through his face, not relief, not yet. Something more like the feeling of a pressure that's been building, finding the first small opening. What happens now, he said. It was the right question. Not can we fix it, not give me another chance, not any of the things that were about him and what he wanted the future to look like. Just what happens. Open. Genuinely open. She considered it. The baby comes in 10 weeks, she said. We're both going to be there for that. Everything else, the marriage, what shape it takes or doesn't take, that's a longer conversation. One I'm not ready to have yet. She met his eyes. But I'm willing to have it. Eventually, he said.
It's more than you've earned so far, she said, not cruelly. Just honestly.
He nodded slowly, it is. She picked up the croissant again. The November light was moving through the window, the kind of thin, pale light that doesn't warm anything, but makes the colors in a room look clear and exact. The onesies on the other chair, the folders on her desk, the paper bag from the bakery on Montague Street. The almond ones are still my favorite, she said. Marcus looked at the bag, then at her. Something shifted in his face, careful, not assuming anything. The very beginning of something that would take a long time to build if it was going to be built at all. Good, he said quietly. I'll remember that. She ate the croissant. He ate his. Outside, the November wind moved through the trees on Willow Street, and the city went on being the city indifferent. Enormous. Full of people doing the hard work of figuring out what came next. Inside the apartment, it was warm and quiet and specific. The baby moved low and slow, a morning greeting. Nora pressed her hand to her side and let herself sit with all of it at once. The cost of the last 6 weeks, the shape of what was ahead, the particular, complicated, still unfinished thing between her and the man sitting across from her, eating an almond croissant in the November light. None of it resolved. Not yet, but present, real. Hers to reckon with on her own terms. That was enough for now. That was, she thought, actually quite a lot.